Good afternoon. I'm going to be reading today a few extracts from The Economist, The World in 2021, as we enter this year, 2021, which we hope will be a better year than 2020. Anyway, I'm reading you a few short extracts from their vision of what the world is going to look like. Okay, or some learnings from 2020. So the first one is written by Ursula Basler, who's president of the CERN Council. It's a physics group in France. And it's called Nature Cannot Be Fooled. As countries around the world emerged from COVID-19 lockdowns in late summer 2020, a trend became apparent. Those that were slow to heed the message of science had paid the price. Delays had resulted in a dramatic rise in infection and fatality rates, requiring more severe and longer-lasting lockdowns, and often plunging the economy into deeper recession. What can we learn from this? Health officials' calls for early lockdown measures were based on the scientific evidence available at the time. Accepting such evidence requires humility, as it cannot be wished away, and ignoring it may hit you harder in the long run. As Richard Feynman, a physicist, once put it, reality must take precedence over public relations, for nature cannot be fooled. We would do well to keep this in mind when tackling many of the world's other pressing challenges. Ultimately, the purpose of science is to establish evidence that can be used to solve problems. This can take time and often involves scientific debate. Science is a dynamic process. Observations are gathered, protocols established, experiments carried out, verifications made, errors tracked down. Consequently, it can be confusing and frustrating for those seeking immediate certainty. But as more evidence is gathered and analyzed, results become increasingly precise, though often more complex, and the basis for decision-making steadily becomes clearer. Communicating how science works to the wider public can be hard, but it is vital. The media, both the traditional kind and social media platforms, bear great responsibility in this respect. Traditional media should rely on evidence-based reporting and explanations rather than chasing clicks by giving credence to far-fetched positions or nonsensical claims. And social media platforms have a duty to monitor and flag misleading information. The COVID-19 pandemic triggered an unprecedented scientific mobilization to understand the virus and to find responses, treatments, and vaccines. The effort among scientists is international and collaborative, as the urgency of dealing with the pandemic has fostered worldwide cooperation. It must also be multidisciplinary. Beyond the efforts in the biomedical sphere, disciplines from mathematics to social sciences are needed in the long fight against the coronavirus to give adequate support to policymakers. CERN has played its part by contributing computing resources and making expertise available. A group of physicists at CERN has also designed a low-cost ventilator that can help patients recovering from COVID-19, in particular those in developing countries. As well as challenging scientists directly, the crisis highlights the difficulty of keeping track of huge numbers of results and publications, guaranteeing quality, making progress efficiently and coherently, and ensuring coordination and cooperation among competing groups. It also highlights the question, how can scientific results be equitably shared with industry and society as a whole? The question predates the pandemic and applies to a wide range of scientific fields. The crisis has shown the value of taking an open and multilateral approach to answering it. In recent years, policymakers have placed much emphasis on research that is problem-oriented rather than curiosity-driven. But when it comes to understanding COVID-19, crucial contributions have come from seemingly unrelated fields. Producing images of the virus using electron microscopes would not have been possible, for example, without quantum mechanics. Science in all its aspects is a single and essential endeavor, and COVID-19 has shown the importance of putting its results at the heart of decision-making. When scientific evidence is respected and multilateral collaboration fostered, solutions come faster for the benefits of us all. Okay. Now I'm going to switch to a short piece written by the mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, called City of Fight. Paris illuminates the way ahead for cities, trust citizens, and build more bike lanes. The COVID-19 crisis has shaken up our lives, and there is still more to come. For a city like Paris, a city open to the world, a city of culture, and one whose way of life revolves around meeting, dialogue, and exchange, it is an unprecedented change. This crisis has caused us to question how we live in the city, how we travel, how we consume. It has made us think afresh about our relationship with others and with the spaces that we share. The main responsibility of a mayor is to understand these disruptions. What do they mean for the everyday life of the city's population and how the city operates? Compared with all other public policymakers, mayors are better placed to understand the reality of their citizens' lives. That's why action at the city level is probably the best scale for concrete measures against the consequences of a crisis like this. Preparing for the post-COVID world starts with handling today's emergencies. This crisis has reminded us that life is fragile. That realization should lead us to do everything we can to preserve it. That means protecting our environment to keep everyone in good health, fighting pollution to ensure the air in our cities is clean, reaching out to the most vulnerable among us because the epidemic has shown us how our destinies are intertwined, and letting citizens create and develop solutions for a future that allows everyone to live better. We need each other, and the key is what we have in common. What I have witnessed during these weeks will mark me for the rest of my life. I saw the energy, creativity, and solidarity of thousands of citizens who are the city's lifeblood. We must not allow this energy to be lost. We must not let our creativity fade, nor let this solidarity disappear. We must draw inspiration from the strength of all Parisians, and as a city, commit ourselves with the same determination. We must trust our citizens, provide them with the means to express themselves democratically, to create with us the city of tomorrow, and set about building it with their own hands. Every time we put our faith in them, they come up with solid, local solutions. We put our trust in restaurant owners to extend their terrace areas, and they made the city more attractive, and they kept their neighborhoods vibrant. We trusted Parisians by opening new cycle lanes, and with their bikes, they are bringing this transformation to life. We must trust everyone around the world who loves Paris in order to bring the City of Light back to its true splendor. I'm sure they will be up to the challenge. The world in 2021 may not be quite the same as it was before, but it will be open to the future. In that world, culture will play a central role. The environment will be the driving force for changes ahead, and solidarity between people and regions will be the foundations of this new ecological pact for the preservation of humanity. Now I'm going to another selection, number 3. Okay. So this is an article called A Black Swan? No. This was a gray rhino, a predictable crisis, by Michelle Wooker, analyst and author. One of the biggest lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic has been the folly of ignoring warnings about highly likely, high-impact risks that are a matter of when, not if. For years, many governments brushed off countless credible warnings that the world was poorly prepared for a pandemic. When the novel coronavirus emerged in China, too many nations were too slow to respond. The pandemic should encourage policymakers to pay more attention to other known but poorly managed risks. These include rising inequality, climate change, and financial imbalance, such as dangerous corporate debt levels and asset bubbles. Picture each of these obvious dangers as a 2-ton gray rhinoceros with its horns pointed our way and its massive weight bearing down on us. They are very visible, and their impact can be foreseen. The interactions among these rhinos heighten the danger. You could appropriately call them a crash, the zoological term for a group of gray rhinos. Politicians, pundits, and investors often invoke the metaphor of the Black Swan to describe highly improbable, even unimaginable events. In particular, the global financial crisis of 2007 to 2009 is often described as a Black Swan event, despite warnings about derivatives and a subprime housing market bubble. By definition, black swans cannot be predicted, so nothing can be done to prepare for them. This kind of thinking makes things worse by encouraging fatalism, rejecting accountability, and giving the nod to short-termism and willful ignorance, in which turn generate volatility and tail risk. To face the looming risks of 2021, we must replace black swan fatalism with gray rhino constructive pragmatism. As COVID-19 spread, analysts quickly downgraded their early pandemic predictions of a fast V-shaped recovery to a slower U-shaped recovery, and then to an even more gradual swoosh. We now have a K-shaped recovery that has given the well-to-do a big boost, creating financial asset bubbles, while essential workers and vulnerable sectors struggle. In 2021, the global economy will suffer from a ripple effect of bankruptcies, job losses, and defaults, which stock markets cannot ignore forever. At the same time, Increasingly violent storms, droughts, wildfires, and freak weather will threaten insurers, property, coastal cities, and by extension, financial stability. Facing the daunting challenges ahead will require long-term thinking, a greater emphasis on the real economy rather than stock market performance, and above all, a commitment to hold ourselves and our leaders accountable. But it also presents new opportunities. Removing fossil fuel subsidies and promoting investment in clean technologies will create jobs and reduce energy and healthcare costs. Tackling inequality will lift the bottom leg of the K-shaped recovery and spread the benefits of the economic rebound. We can see black swans only in the rearview mirror. In 2021, we should focus on the gray rhinos in front of us, obvious, foreseeable, and giving us a choice to respond. Okay, the next piece I'm going to read is called A Chance to Change Things. And this is by Slavia Chankova, who's an economist, correspondent for The Economist. The crisis has upended people's lives. What does it take to make a new habit stick? Barely 8% of New Year's resolutions survive until the end of January. Some people set goals that are too ambitious. Others simply set too many goals. Yet perhaps the biggest reason why people fail so miserably is that changing a particular behavior is difficult if the routines that are tightly woven around it remain the same. Resisting the lure of a calorie-laden caramel latte in the morning is easier if you switch to a route that doesn't take you past the coffee shop. In a survey of nearly 700,000 people in Britain carried out in August 2020, about a quarter of people said their lives had changed completely or a lot since COVID-19 came along, and a third said, with characteristic British understatement, that they had made quite a few changes. Many of these changes will stick because the pandemic has upended people's routines so dramatically. It does not matter whether you walk past the coffee shop or not, if it is closed down, or if you rarely leave the house. Many changes were for the worse, but not all. During the lockdown, unhealthy snacking increased, but so did cooking at home and eating family meals together, practices generally linked with healthier eating patterns. People could not see friends and family, but they got to know the people next door. About 20% of Britons said talking more to their neighbors was a change that would outlast the pandemic. With gyms and organized sports closed for months, some people cut down on regular exercise. Others, however, took up new sports. In England, the proportion of people cycling at least once a week reached 16% in June 2020, twice the level of the early weeks of the lockdown. Nextbike, which runs shared bike schemes in several European counties, reported a 35% increase in rides in April and May compared with a year earlier. The greater popularity of cooking, neighborly chats, and cycling will persist. If you do something new once a day for 2 weeks, it starts to feel automatic. The defining feature of a habit, says Benjamin Gardner of King's College London. Doing something for longer helps solidify the habit. One study of people who took up healthy eating or regular exercise found that the degree to which it felt automatic increased, but then plateaued on average after 66 days. That is roughly how long Europeans spent in lockdown. Other things will help too. Many people with office-based jobs will work from home in the future, at least some of the time. That will help them stick with home-cooked meals and being the chummiest with their neighbors. Those returning to offices may feel nervous about traveling on crowded public transport, making cycling more attractive. Big cities are trying not to waste the crisis. They are pumping up cycling's prospects by subsidizing bike purchases and laying down more cycling lanes. The pandemic has changed many things, but for some people at least, the changes are like New Year's resolutions they wish they had made long ago. Okay, now I'm going to read a little bit about science and technology. Okay, and this is by the health policy editor, Natasha Loder. A shot in the arm, the largest vaccination program in history, will begin. In early 2020, with the coronavirus pandemic tearing across the world, most people thought it unlikely that a vaccine would arrive anytime soon. And as work to develop vaccines began, there were dire warnings of difficulties ahead. That is why it is so remarkable that heading into 2021, it seems likely that one or more working vaccines will soon be available, or are available. Clearly was written before. It seems likely that one or more, that this can be said with such certainty reflects the number and diversity of approaches that being taken. Scientists have developed many different ways of making vaccines. The oldest method is to take the virus, in this case SARS-CoV-2, and hobble it in some way so it does not cause disease when it is given. This could be done by weakening it or even killing it entirely. Codagenics, a biotech startup, is making a live attenuated vaccine of this kind. The vaccine is alive, but its ability to replicate has been restricted. 2 Chinese efforts, one from Sinovac and another from Sinopharm, are using inactivated versions of SARS-CoV-2. In recent times, genetic engineering has greatly increased the range of possible vaccines. A popular technique is to take different harmless virus and use it as a sort of transport system to deliver a key portion of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. This sheep in wolf's clothing approach is being used by one of the leading vaccines being made by AstraZeneca, a drugs giant. Based on a chimpanzee adenovirus, it infects cells and delivers instructions to make the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein, thus priming the immune system to recognize the real virus. And that one has been approved in the UK. I don't think it's approved here yet. Most exciting of all are the nucleic acid vaccines, where a gene that codes for a bit of the virus is injected directly into the body. That bit of the virus is then manufactured inside the body from the instructions provided, again priming the immune system. 2 leading vaccine makers, Pfizer and Moderna, are pursuing this novel approach with promising results. It would result easier manufacturing at a scale than other kinds of vaccines. And those are the 2 vaccines that are currently approved for emergency use in the US. And I had one of those last week. Stanley Plotkin of the University of Pennsylvania, inventor of the rubella vaccine, says that what he has seen so far of COVID-19 vaccines suggests that those which generate responses to the spike protein will be able to protect people exposed to the virus from developing COVID-19, at least in the short term. What remains less clear, though, is whether these vaccines will prevent people from carrying the virus and spreading it to others. Emergency authorization of vaccines is likely happened in late 2020, but supply will be extremely restricted in the first quarter of 2021. Vaccine makers will have more data that will allow regulators to widen the use of these novel vaccines. Demand will still vastly outstrip supply, a problem that will continue, unfortunately, throughout 2021. The coming year will see difficult political and public debates about how to prioritize the use of this supply. Although there are fears about vaccine nationalism, one of the surprising features of 2021 will be how many countries work out how to work together well to produce and distribute vaccines. The COVAX initiative, to which more than 180 countries have signed up, unfortunately this doesn't include America, hopes to avoid the ugly and self-defeating situation in 2020 that saw countries trying to outbid each other for limited supplies of PPE and ventilators. The scheme allows rich countries to subsidize vaccines for poorer countries, with the initial aim of vaccinating 3% of the population in all member countries, starting with frontline workers. The hope is that coverage can be expanded to 20% by the end of the year, focusing on those at highest risk. A few countries that look likely to be oversupplied with vaccines, such as America and Britain, will try to vaccinate as many people as possible before the winter of 2021. That will raise ethical questions, as most countries will have to be more strategic. The pandemic could be brought under control without vaccinating everyone. UNESCO, the main UN agency organizing the global distribution of vaccine, says universal vaccination will not happen in the initial years of the outbreak. Nadia Sanders, a professor of supply chain management at Northeastern University, says the availability of a vaccine will not lead immediately to vaccinations because so much else needs to be organized. There are concerns about the availability of everything from medical glass to needles. She says the supply chain needs to be designed and mapped at a global scale and worries that this will take longer than expected. Analysts at UBS, a bank that warn that fill and finish, where the vaccine is put into vials and packaged for distribution, is one of the most significant bottlenecks, followed by shipping. All these issues will pose problems in 2021. And there is one final complexity. The first vaccines to arrive will need to be kept cold during distribution. Currently, at least 25% of vaccines arrive in degraded state due to problems with the cold chain. One thing is clear, I think that's mostly in low-income, middle-income countries. One thing is clear, vaccines will arrive, but they will be distributed unevenly within countries and among them, simply because of the scale of the distribution problem. In the coming year, many people will struggle to understand why loved ones have been lost due to a disease for which there is a vaccine. In 2020, heroic efforts have produced vaccines in months rather than years. In 2021, further heroic efforts will be needed to get them from the laboratory to the clinic. But we're sort of fortunate in this area that is possible. Okay, and I'm just going to read one final reading about getting away from vaccines and COVID, called The Power of Green Technology. The technology, and this is written by the chief executive of Google and Alphabet. After decades of incremental steps forward, 2021 will be the most significant year yet for combating climate change. Two developments have made this possible. First, the science tells us that we have a decade to reduce emissions dramatically or face the worst impact of climate change. Many of those impacts have already arrived at our door, from the historic and deadly wildfires in Australia and California to severe flooding around the world. There is no denying that climate change is already disrupting our daily lives. At the same time, support for climate action has never been stronger. From Generation Z's solution-oriented mindset to political support that increasingly crosses party lines, to Europe's large-scale ambition to become the first carbon-neutral continent, society is ever more unified against the threat of climate change. Second, we are seeing prominent technologies and policies that will bring carbon-free emission within reach. Not long ago, it was hard to imagine a 24/7 carbon-free electrical supply. At its most basic level, the wind does not always blow and the sun does not shine at night. But new technologies, including better energy storage and the reduction of costs associated with wind and solar power by 70% and 89% respectively over the last 10 years, are bringing 24/7 carbon-free energy closer to reality. Another of those technologies is artificial intelligence. At Google, we are working on ways to apply AI to optimize electricity consumption within our data centers. In collaboration with our sister venture, DeepMind, we have developed solutions that have reduced the amount of energy used to cool our data centers by 30%. This approach could be used by commercial buildings, including airports and shopping malls, to do the same. AI can also be used to make wind power more predictable, which will increase the value, utilization, and adoption of renewable energy. Meanwhile, sensors on satellites can locate large-scale emitters of carbon dioxide at a very fine-grained level. This could dramatically improve the effectiveness of the Paris Climate Agreement. Technology is also helping cities reduce their carbon emissions. According to the Global Covenant of Mayors, an international alliance of over 10,000 cities and local governments committed to fighting climate change, less than 20% of cities outside Western Europe have the time, resources, and data to meet their climate commitments. With platforms like our own Environmental Insights Explorer, cities can be anonymized, aggregated, mapping data to estimate the carbon footprint of their buildings and transport, and realize their solar energy potential. A critical step as cities continue to contribute over 70% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. Technology is also helping communities adapt to the effects of climate change that are already apparent. As one example, we are able to use satellite data to map wildfires in real time and better predict how they might spread. In India, flood forecasting models use AI to predict when floods will hit and how deep the waters will get, helping save lives. Machine learning is also being applied to the nowcast rainfall sooner and with more accuracy than conventional forecasting methods, helping people make safer, more informed decisions. Driven by these promising trends and tools, companies have made bigger sustainability commitments in short timeframes. At Google, we have eliminated our carbon legacy using high-quality offsets and set a goal to operate on 24/7 carbon-free energy in all our data centers and campuses worldwide by 2030. Our aim is to demonstrate that a 100% carbon-free electrical grid is not just possible, but economically viable. We hope that companies of all sizes will join us in this effort. In addition to concrete and ambitious company commitments, the world also needs enabling policies and global frameworks to ensure we are working towards the same goals. We know it is possible. We have seen this kind of collaboration during the pandemic, as the private sector worked with government to deliver personal protective equipment, medical devices, and contact tracing apps needed to fight the virus. Stronger public-private partnerships will be just as critical in fighting climate change. Throughout history, every generation has confronted big challenges. Climate change will be our generation's most profound challenge. And in 2021, the world will take its biggest steps yet to hear it. Thank you, and I hope it's not been too depressing about 2021. There are hopeful things on the horizon. Thank you.